Rabbi say, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats, turn off your mobile phones or put them on silent. Please close that back door, thank you. Rabbi Ulman has asked for the doors to be closed. The other door also. We thank everybody for coming. Those who are brave and courageous to actually come in person. And we thank also those who are joining on Zoom. But unfortunately, we cannot offer refreshments to those who are on Zoom. There's no technology yet to Zoom refreshments. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. I will not. I need to get information about it. Maybe during the course of the lecture. I already had a request from Eretz Yisrael how to view the lectures. They have been recorded, and how they will be uploaded. Will they be on the regular JML? I'm not sure. I don't know. I will find out, and maybe by the end of the lecture, I'll have some information. So, welcome back, everybody. Please take a seat. We have a very interesting topic today. Modern science and determining Jewish status, which was discussed a little bit yesterday, but today is, can we use medical science, DNA, in helping determine whether one is Jewish or not? Sounds pretty fascinating. And Rabbi Ulman is very well versed in this topic. And that's why he's going to share with us his knowledge on this. Please welcome Rabbi Ulman.
Good afternoon already. Again, like to echo Rabbi Groner, thank you for those who came in person. It's always easier to speak to live faces as much as we have also a audience on Zoom. The topic today is, apart from the fact that it's fascinating in its own right, it also is an indication how, no matter how cutting edge a question may be, Torah and Yiddishkeit always has a say on it. And the important thing to know is that we find the yesod, the foundation, and the precedents and the sources for everything in the Talmud and the codes. The question at hand is really, in a way, the theme is continuing from yesterday. Yesterday, we spoke about the importance of determining Jewish status as something that for us, it's not a technicality, it's not being pedantic, it's not sort of, splitting hairs and saying, trying to trivialize, God forbid, what it being Jewish means. We know that Mi Yehudi, as I mentioned yesterday, is something which is essential to our survival. And Mi Yehudi doesn't depend, it's a neshama thing. It doesn't depend on how a person feels. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have a child who was abducted from their parents at the age of 2 months, and he grew up with a different nation, doesn't know that he's Jewish. The fact is, this child is Jewish. There's even a name for this child, for the category. It's called Tinoik Shenishba, an abducted child. That the child, on one hand, he's not being judged. He's not responsible, he or she, for not keeping Yiddishkeit. But at the same time, this child is Jewish, and the neshama suffers by being trapped in a place where it can't express itself, where it can't keep kosher, it can't keep Shabbos, it can't learn Torah. So we do find that this child is definitely a Jewish, and it's a mitzvah to be able to do pidyon shvuim, to be able to release such a child and to be able to find out that this, to bring back to his or her source. At the same time, if you have a situation that a child was adopted by religious Jewish parents, for whatever reason, nobody told them about, we had a case just a few weeks ago in Sydney that somebody came to get married. They have to go to the Bezdin to get married. And when we started to look into it, because they said that they were converted to the Sydney Basin, we saw that the child back, now it's already an adult in the 30s, the child was circumcised at Das Bezdin. For whatever reason, the parents never came to toivel the child. Perhaps they thought that this was that was it. In those days, it wasn't the same level of, keeping up with things and contacting and so on and so forth. So for whatever reason, the parents thought the child was converted, but they never took the child to mikveh. And as much as the child grew up Jewish, and as much as the child thought that he was Jewish, al pi halacha, he wasn't Jewish. He had to go again through a mikveh, through conversion and kabbalah and mitzvahs. So we see that being Jewish is something which is so profound and so deep. It's not a question of any particular person deciding, I feel I'm Jewish. Why should I be questioned when I grew up as a Jew? It's also the definition has to be a definition of Torah. And today we have an added thing. We have something that became very popular. Specifically, people all around are checking they're going to different companies like 23andMe or Heritage.com, whatever it is. There's many companies that check you out, and people find, exactly what is the ratio of their Obstam, of their background, genealogical background and genetic background. And they come out very excited. Some people that they find cousins and long lost relatives, because it becomes like a whole, it becomes a universal sort of program. And the question is a much deeper question. Number one, to what extent can one use DNA? And as you all know, DNA is a very unique genetic code that is embedded in every single person, that is unique to that person. Can we use DNA for halacha generally, something that an eye can't see? Can DNA suddenly disqualify somebody? Or the other way around, to make somebody kosher? And specifically to our question today, can DNA help prove one's status? A person comes along, he doesn't or she doesn't have any documents, or not enough documents. They can only have, let's say, 30% of evidence that they're Jewish. You can't, al pi halacha, certify them in the Bezdin, and they go and do a test. I'm 93% Ashkenazi Jew. It's very, very sort of popular result, whatever the percentage is. Can this be used? So, first of all, I want to begin with a story, a shocking story that happened just recently. There is a very well-known individual somewhere in America who has smicha, he's a rabbi. It's a very well-known family. His first marriage didn't work out. He got divorced. He married a second zivug, a second marriage. He married a lady who became religious. Her father is not Jewish, her mother is Jewish. And the Bezdin to which they went in America did a very, very thorough check. And they found the grandmother was fully Jewish. She grew up in a Jewish family. She was born in the 1930s. She grew up in a Jewish family, without any doubt. Both the parents were Jewish. And they certified the color, rightfully so. Any Bezdin would do the same. I'm saying it not as a comment on the Bezdin, something right or wrong, but that was a correct decision to make. Sometime later, they had 3 kids, by the way, this lady with a rabbi. Sometime later, they decided, when this whole thing, 23andMe came up, so all 3 generations, the grandmother, the mother, and the lady herself, they did a DNA test, and what came out was a shocking revelation. By the time they got the results, the grandmother actually passed away. But what they found was that the grandmother was zero Jewish DNA, nothing. She was purely Italian DNA. And, you discover relatives. So they found that this particular grandmother has a sister who is an Italian, no Jewish lady, also living in the same part of America, more or less. And this Italian Jewish lady has a older sister who was born on the same day in the same hospital as the seemingly Jewish grandmother. So what transpired was, through this information, was something that Baruch Hashem doesn't happen today. Today they make, the hospitals are very careful that nobody should be switched at birth. That those two ladies were switched at birth. There was an Italian girl and a Jewish girl were born on the same day. Somehow they switched around. And this Italian girl grew up in a Jewish family, and some Italian family has, without knowing about it, has a Jewish girl growing up with them. So when we found out this, it was obviously a very shocking revelation. There was other reasons why it was clear this was the case. But what we did was, in 1930s, it used to happen. We have such cases. It didn't happen. It doesn't happen lately. It's almost no cases of switching at birth that I know. I mean, statistically even. But in those days, it used to happen. They didn't put proper, like as soon as the child was born, you put a bracelet and whatever it is. So we had to be able to right away, on one hand, rectify the situation. So we did organize a gear for the lady herself. I'm talking about the wife of this Rebbetzin and her 3 kids. But we did it in the way, in order to, that it should be considered a gear misafik. Why? Because, we have to also consider the psychological welfare of this woman who will think now her whole life was a lie. And we were able to say, listen, there is an element of suffix, because ultimately you can't just completely throw away the chazaka, the legal reality that there were 3 generations of Jews who were known to be as Jews. I mean, the Talmud says that when a woman comes with a child, you presume that's a child. So the fact that nobody wants to live with this level of doubt, and nobody wants to, because it's very real doubt. So obviously, we don't ask anybody to make DNA tests to try to find out those things. But once you do it, you can't just close your eyes. But at the same time, it's something that had to be rectified in a very, very sensitive way, that the people should feel that there was a suffix. So you have to be able to eliminate the suffix, the doubt. Going back to the question itself, can today a person who doesn't know that doesn't have full proof they're Jewish say, look, I'm 90-something% Ashkenazi Jew? The answer is, halachically, you cannot do that. And the reason why it cannot be used as a full proof is because all of us know that each person is a product of the DNA of his or her father and his or her mother. And the mother is a product of her father and mother, and it goes until the end of days. So the reason why you cannot use a full DNA to be able to establish Jewish status is because theoretically it's possible that you have a situation where there was a non-Jewish lady who lived in the 19th century, and she married a Jew, and her daughter married a Jew, and her daughter married a Jew. By the time you come to 2021, it's a very big percentage is a Jewish DNA, but because all the mothers are not Jewish, they're not Jewish, so you can't really rely on that. And vice versa. It's possible to have a situation where somebody has a very non-Jewish DNA, and at the same time, it could be Jewish, because it could be that somewhere in the 19th century, there was a Jewish lady who married an Irish Catholic, and they had a girl who married non-Jew, and so on and so forth. They only had girls. And ultimately, by the time they come to 2021, it's a non-Jewish DNA, because it was almost completely, taken over by non-Jewish DNA, but nevertheless, the child is Jewish. So seemingly, you cannot use DNA to establish Jewish status. There's one particular exception that may be an exception, and that's what I want to discuss today. It's something that is called mitochondrial DNA. And I'll explain to you what it is for those who didn't study biology or science. The largest cell in a human body is the female egg. It's very large. It has something like between 3 and 4 billion letters of DNA, not million, but billion. And within that female egg, you'll have something called mitochondria. Mitochondria is a minuscule part which contains something like 16,500 letters of DNA. So you compare 16,500 compared to 3 or 4 billion. So it's very, very, looks like very, very small, insignificant, but it's a very powerful part of the DNA. It's like almost like a nucleus of the DNA. And it is passed on from the mother to all the children, to sons and daughters, but it ultimately can only be passed from the daughters furthermore. Why? Because with males, it self-destructs. So in other words, so it can only go from females. It can't go from males. So when you check your mitochondrial DNA, it would only be goyrus. It'll only take into account the female part. So in theory, you can, in theory, have a situation where there could be a lady who lived 10 generations ago, and if you take somebody today and match on the mitochondrial DNA level, then it stands to reason this person is Jewish, because it takes into account no fathers whatsoever. The question is, number one, is it practically, can it be done? How do you know to be able to connect on such a level? Number two, if it can be done, what is the source that it can be used in Jewish law? Jewish law is not just something that comes along, a new scientific invention, and suddenly, you can use it. There has to be some kind of a precedent, some kind of a source for that. Now, I want to share with you one particular story that I was involved with that actually, in a way, was a catalyst that moved this particular area in halacha to a very, very, in the way that is today, became used in many, many Botei Din. The concept of using mitochondrial DNA began to be discussed between a few of us who deal with this area of halacha, to do with the area of yuchsin, which means statuses and different qualifications or disqualifications of statuses. That is something which we started to discuss perhaps something like 6 and something years ago. And we decided to have almost like a very clandestine, I'll explain to why it was a clandestine, a mini conference between a few rabbis and a few of the top scientists in this area. And this was planned for Menachem Ov for August or September 2016. It was planned to happen in the headquarters of Professor Steinbeck and Talmudic Encyclopedia. And we invited the greatest scholar and Talmudist of generation who passed away since then. His name is Abzal Mechem Gulbek, to attend. And another maybe 3 or 4 rabbis were coming to attend, and 3 of the top geneticists in this area. Now, prior to this conference, I received a call from a lady in United States of America who came from a very illustrious family. Her family were rabbis and chassidim and people who sacrificed their life in the Soviet Union for Yiddishkeit. And she called me up with the following question. Her brother, she comes from a family of many siblings. Her brother strayed away from Judaism. He didn't become an atheist, but he became what they call a Western humanist, which means that he decided that, there is a God in this world, but, there's no difference who's a Jew, who's a non-Jew, we're all the same. You don't have to practice Judaism to be close to God. and he moved to a very small town in northern Europe, and he met with a Catholic Polish girl, and they got married. I'm not sure how they got married, civilly or de facto, but they were living together, and she was pregnant with the first child, with a girl. And the family, for better or for worse, I'm not judging anybody, they basically stopped contact with him, except for that particular sister. That sister continued to be in touch with him. And I encouraged it when she asked me if that's the right thing to do. I said it's important that somebody should keep contact with him. And this sister was talking to her sister-in-law, the Catholic girl. And the Catholic girl said to her in the conversation, purely for social purposes, there's no agenda involved. She certainly didn't want to have any connection to being Jewish. And she said that there is a rumor in our family that there is Jewish blood. Somebody's Jewish in the family. So right away, the Jewish sister-in-law, her antennas go up. She gets all excited because it's like a person who's drowning. You stand them like a straw, will grab onto a straw, right? So even though it's so unlikely that anything should come out of it, she said, tell me more about it. And she says, I don't know, I'm going to ask my mother. So she calls her mother. She comes from a city called Krakow in Poland. Irva in Israel, correct. Correct. And a lot of great Gdei Yisrael buried there. So they have, but also was a very non-Jewish Polish city together with it. So it could be either way. Certainly wouldn't say somebody coming from Krakow has a chazak of being Jewish, that's for sure. But you're right. It was at a time a Jewish city. And she asked her mother, who's also a Catholic lady, tell me, do we have, what's the story about Jewish blood in our family? So the mother says, listen, leave it alone. We're not Jewish, we're Catholics. Why do you have to go there? So she says, but look, I have to be polite. I'm talking to my sister-in-law. I have to answer the question. So she says to her that, look, there is a hearsay that we have that your grandmother's grandmother, her name was Clara Robinson, married to Isidore Robinson, lived in Odessa. And the story is that they are Jewish. So the Jewish sister-in-law said, would you do what's called a birur yuchsin? Will you conduct a status clarification with my sister-in-law? I said, look, first of all, they have to agree. We can't force them to do it. Ask them. It's interesting that the Jewish brother wasn't interested, but the non-Jewish girl, by that time she was curious, and she says, yeah, I'm happy to speak to the rabbi. So I started to talk to her, and we put together quite a thick file on her. We're able to get quite a number of documents. What happened was that we found a connection. In Poland, it was quite easy to find documents when you go to the registry. We found a connection between the girl and her mother. Let's say the names, just take out names from the box. Say the girl's name is Katerina, her mother is Barbara, her mother is Christina, her mother is Josepha, Josepha's mother is Lydia, and Lydia's parents are Clara and Isidore Robinson from Odessa. So we found connections. We also found some what's called hearsay or Masiach Lifitume. There was a non-Jewish neighbor who was by that time was very old. He was over 96 years old. And he said he would tell Lydia, who was the daughter of Clara, and her daughter, Josepha, says, during the war, because they came from Odessa to Krakow before the war, and they were there during the whole Nazi, during the Holocaust. So they told them, we always knew, after the war, that you were Jewish, but we liked you, so we didn't give you over to the Nazis. That's what he said. There was also other things about somebody asked about birthright. There was here and there, it wasn't enough to certify, that's for sure. So I said, and there's much more to it. I'm telling you a couple of things. For example, there was also hearsay, wasn't documented, that the maiden name of Clara was Wurhaft, which Robinson also could be, it's one of those names that depends where they come from. You take a name like Schwarz or Weiss. Is it a Jewish name or not? You go, or Hoffman. You go to Germany, it could be purely a Goyish name. Nothing to do with being Jewish. You go to Poland and Russia, very hard to find a non-Jewish Hoffman, or non-Jewish Schwarz or Weiss or Goldberg or Ulman for that matter. Ulman is in Eastern Europe was a rabbinical family. It was purely Jewish. When you go to Germany, I'm sure there was a lot of Ulmans who were not Jewish. So Robinson's one of those names. You go to England, a lot of non-Jews call Robinson, but in Eastern Europe, it wasn't the same as Finkelstein or Cohen or Levi, but it had a bigger chance, put it this way. So the maiden name, according to oral rumor, was Wurhaft. There was also, in the family, there was a tradition that this Clara had 6 kids. And we know about Lydia because Lydia was the mother of the grandmother of the girl. But there was also another son called Leon who went to America, and we lost any kind of information about him. But we didn't know about the other 4 kids. What were the names? So I said to the religious, the Hasidic sister-in-law, I said, look, I'm going in a month or so, I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. We're having this conference, and I will tell you whether or not it's kedai, it's worthwhile for your sister-in-law to do a mitochondrial test. So when we came to the conference, it was a very fascinating, a lot of things we already knew before that, but I'm going to give you a synopsis of what it's all about. The studies have shown that when it comes to Sephardi Jews, usually it's much more difficult to pinpoint families. When I say families, I mean genetic families that were exclusively Jewish, because there was a lot of Sephardi families, Iraqi families, and it was much harder to be able to isolate them and to be able to identify them. When it came to Ashkenazim, what they found was, at that time, today is already much more, but at that time they found that about 45% of Ashkenazi Jews can be matched to one of the 4 genetic families that are virtually exclusively Jewish. What does it mean? That when Ashkenazi Jewry started, somebody knows the history, there was the king of Rhine. Rhine was the name for Germany in those days. They brought Rabbi Nuances and few large families to bring into Germany, to Rhine. And that was the beginning of Ashkenazi Jewry. And there were families which developed, genetic families, which we can identify. And today, if those of us here who are Ashkenazim, if we'll do a genetic test, a mitochondrial test I'm talking about, not a regular genetic test, then if we are Jewish, I'm sure everybody here is, 45%, now it's already about 50%, were matched to one of those families. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're not matched, God forbid, anybody is questioning your yichus. Not at all. Because number one, the fact that it's only 50% shows what about the other 50%? And the answer is very simple. Number one, this science is a very new science. We haven't identified many families yet, number one. And the proof is that since 2016, there was another couple of families which were identified. So it already shows you that it's a growing science. And number two, we know that there was, throughout the years, there were quite a number of people who converted to Judaism, especially in times of Bais Sheni, Second Temple. And when somebody comes from that, there could be a lot of great rabbis who were converted to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, that whose DNA, if you come from them, may not be so identifiably Jewish, and nevertheless, they as Jewish and not less than any of us. So they're great, great people. So it doesn't mean this particular idea is, God forbid, it's not to be able to question anybody's yichus, who's already known as a chazak of being Jewish. It's only meant to help those who find it difficult to be able to find this evidence. And there was a lot of, basically what we spoke about from point of view of statistics, of probability, that if somebody comes along, for example, and says he's 30% evidence, if he's matched to one of the 4 families, it becomes 99.999. In genetics and statistics, it's never 100%. Never. If anybody will ever do just an experimental test to match their child to themselves, it'll come out as 99.99%, which is as good as 100%. They'll never ever give you 100% in this area. So it's interesting that we listen to the scientists. According to the scientists, they claim it's 100%. They claim that if you take a non-Jew from the crowd of non-Jews and you test them and he comes out one of those families, you can consider him to be Jew. They're very polite and respectful. They never claimed that they're here to be able to decide halacha. They said this is up to the rabbis. But the scientists said from their perspective, if somebody was matched to one of the 4 families, then even if they had no prior hint of being Jewish, that would make them Jewish. In our opinion, it would be only a suffix still, because you need some kind of what's called a raglayim ledover. Raglayim ledover means some kind of a prior reason why you want to be able to think that this person has a connection to being Jewish. This is in a very, very concise, very oversimplified manner to give you the idea about this question. So when I came back to Australia, I told the sister-in-law, the religious one, I said, listen, I would encourage your sister to do the test. You have to explain to her it's a very new thing. It doesn't mean that there'll be some magic thing that automatically should be classified and considered to be Jewish, but it'll go a long way to be able to help it. So these tests have to be done under hashgacha. Anything to do with yuchsin, anything to do with the Jewish status, has to be done under proper supervision. Why? Because in order to be admissible in Beis Din, I can take somebody else's swab and give it to a lab, right? I mean, how do we know? So not because we try to distrust anybody, but in order for that to have this weight of the Beis Din's decision, it has to be under hashgacha. So it was hard for me to travel from Australia to Sweden. So I asked a colleague of mine who was also involved in this area. He's a dayan, a judge, a rabbinic judge in Moscow, very much involved in this area. As a matter of fact, he established one of the few labs today that check the data and interpret the data. He has it in Moscow. And he agreed to travel to this little shtetl in Northern Europe, somewhere in Scandinavia, and to be able to test this young lady. By the time he was able to go, it was a day before Erev Yom Kippur, and she has given birth to a baby girl just prior to that. So she took, Baruch Hashem, today you don't need to have a blood test, it's enough to have a swab. So she took a swab, he took her back to Russia. And in those days, it took a long time. It took like over a month to be able to get the results. Today it's much, much quicker. And lo and behold, she is matched to one of the 4 families. So at that time, they were publishing a whole book about the subject. I published a tshuva, a responsum, which I'll give you a gist of it, because I think it's very important in this context of this lecture to explain that it's not just some kind of a logical thing that we try to push through. In Yiddishkeit, it has to be based in like I said before, in Shas and Poskim, in the Talmud and the codes. This tshuva actually is the very first one that appears in my sefer, which came out. The reason why it's the first tshuva, because it's written according to topics, and the first topic in order of Even Ezer, in order of that particular order of Shulchan Aruch, talks about Jewish statuses. So that happened to be the first tshuva that was printed, and the gist of it is as follows. I'm going to give you now. There's a number of reasons why I believe there's a very strong source in halacha, in the primary sources, but it's only one of them. I'm going to give you something which I consider to be the strongest one. There is a very, very complicated and lengthy area in Jewish law called the area of agunas. Now today, when you ask somebody what is aguna, people associate aguna with a woman whose husband doesn't want to give her a get, because unfortunately today this is the main scenario that we have. In olden times, aguna was something else. Aguna was a woman who was married chuppah v'kiddushin, married Kedas Moshe v'Yisrael according to the law of Moses in Israel, but her husband disappeared. We don't know that he's dead. There's not even one witness saying that he passed away. And at the same time, he's nowhere to be found. So she's considered, aguna means almost like in Hebrew, igun means a anchor. When you're sort of stuck, you can't move. Like when you put an anchor on a boat. So aguna means a woman who's chained. That's exactly what it means. So she's chained. On one hand, she can't remarry. But on the other hand, she, she's has to continue to live the way she is. So she's sort of doesn't have a husband, but at the same time, she can't get on with her life. And the largest chapter in the whole of Shulchan Aruch is chapter 17 in Even Ezer, which deals with all of the laws of aguna. What testimony would be kosher, what wouldn't be kosher? When could you assume that a husband is dead? If you saw the husband falling into a pit with scorpions, or if you saw him falling from a ship into the water and he doesn't come up. All of these scenarios spoken about, what kind of witness do you need? Usually you need 2 witnesses. Over here, 1 witness is enough. It's one of the exceptions in Jewish law. If you have 1 witness who testifies to the husband's death, 1 witness is enough. What are the consequences if a woman decided to marry and the husband came back? All of this is discussed in this particular chapter. There's one particular scenario. This scenario is that they find a dead body. And this dead body cannot be identified. The face is disfigured, so you can't tell that it's the husband. but there are what's called raglayim ledover, which means, again, how do you translate raglayim ledover? It means there's some kind of a circumstantial evidence that hints to the fact that there is a possibility that this could be the husband. It's not just a random body that you decide to check. And the woman thinks it could be him because of circumstances, because of the situation, how it was found, that's where he went, but you can't identify him. So the woman comes along and says, you know what? I was married to him. There is a sign on his body which I can identify, which shows that he's my husband. And they check, and he does have that sign on his body. So the Talmud and later on the poskim discuss what kind of a sign do you need in order to be able to free this lady and say, yeah, this is a husband, therefore he's dead, and therefore she can remarry. And there are basically three types of signs that exist. There's a sign called siman, a weak siman. You know, if you find somebody that has a face, you know, an earlobe that's stuck to the face, every few people can have that, right? It's very, very common. So that's not considered to be a strong siman. You know, something which every few people have, it's not going to help her. There's something called a siman beinani, which means a average siman, an average sign, an average identifying sign. And that the Talmud discusses and the code discusses that you need a couple of such signs in order to be able to free her. But then there is something called a siman muvak. Siman muvak means the most rare possible sign, the most identifying sign, and that even one is enough to be able to allow this woman to remarry and say, yeah, this is her husband. And the codes discuss what exactly is a siman muvak. And they give you a mathematical approximation. They say 1 in 1,000. So if you have a situation where every 100 people have something, that is still not considered to be a siman muvak. 1 in 1,000, that's how rare it has to be. That is something to be considered to be a siman muvak. So one of the main things that are argued in my response, in my tshuva, on one hand, and I also had to bring things which are raglayim ledover, also other circumstantial evidence, the evidence, you know, to show that there is a reason to suspect that there could be Jews. But what I argued was that you have two very, very real and strong comparisons between the two cases. Number one, the comparison of change of status. I would venture to say, arguably, that the two most severe and consequential changes of status in Jewish law is to make from a married woman an unmarried woman. We all know that it really is a very, very great consequence. If a married woman would act as an unmarried woman and she would marry somebody else, it impacts on her. It's one of the most severe prohibitions and impacts on the kids. It's one of the 10 commandments. So the change of status from being unmarried to being married is one, the most severe change of status, which is talking about in the Aguna case. And the other one is to make somebody who was until now was known as a non-Jew, to make them a Jew. You would also agree that it's a very, very radical and very sort of consequential change of status. That's number one. So the change of status is very comparable. The second thing is nature of a siman. Just like in laws of Agunas, you need echad me'elef, 1 in 1,000. Similarly over here, it's even more rare, this mitochondrial DNA. It's definitely much, much more rare than 1 in 1,000. So for those two reasons, there was other reasons also, but that's one of the yesodus, one of the sources and precedents and foundations in the Talmud and the codes were argued that it's very comparable. And it's a quite interesting and a lengthy, relatively speaking, lengthy tshuva. And it was published right away. And when my conclusion was that, in my humble opinion, this young lady is Jewish, but I said that that's la halacha, that's only in theory. Lemaisa, but to be able to actually issue her with a certificate, I'm going to wait until Gedolei Yisrael, until great authorities will agree with me, because in such a thing, you can't just come along and everything is to be accountable. In my sefer, I always made it a rule, because we're talking about questions that affect the generations of our people. I always made it a rule that it has to be bichsav, everything is, that's how the book developed. I didn't plan to publish it, but every shaila of nature had to be in writing. And I didn't issue a psak until, depending on how controversial and how difficult and how unusual the case was, minimum 2 authorities to agree with me, and sometimes up to 10, depending on how difficult the case was. But I felt that's the only way. If somebody calls you up with a question on the laws of Nida, or questions on the law of Shabbos, or Yom Kippur, or whatever it is, it's between them and Hashem, and you can answer them over the phone, and so on and so forth. When it comes to something which it has an impact on the future of the Jewish people, there's such a level of achrayas, of responsibility, that was the rule that I made, that it has to be always bichsav, and there has to be always at least 2 poskim who are great in this particular area to agree. So when I published the tshuva, there was a great posek to whom I have a tremendous amount of respect. His name is Rabbi Weiss. He wrote a tshuva to argue against me, and they published back to back in a kuntras. And he spoke about many different reasons why I felt the mitochondrial DNA cannot be used at such a level. After it was published, I received a phone call from the father of the young man. And he said to me, "So, Rabbi, what does it mean? What do you mean?" I said, "Look, in my opinion, she's Jewish, but it's going to take time to be able to certify it." He said, "Explain to me what it means to certify it." I said, "If I, for example, give a letter saying she's Jewish to marry her, to Misada Kedushin, to be able to officiate at a wedding, I would wait until it becomes more accepted. It's a very new area in halacha. It's not as long as it used to be. Today, things go much faster." He said, "Rabbi Ulman," he says, "if you will, once you issue a psak, I don't need anybody else. I'll rely on your psak, that she's Jewish and you can marry and everything else. Until then, I don't understand, almost for sure, not for sure. I'll wait. I'm not going to be in contact with them until, I'm not going to resume my relationship until it'll become a final psak, which is already accepted halacha ulamais in action." It happened to be that the religious sister-in-law, she's a very, very good in searching for things on computer genealogical websites, which I'm not good at. I know how to interpret them, but I'm not good at searching for them. And she came across, she didn't rest, and she came across, it was an Elul that year, Aroma Tshuva in Shvat 2017, and this discovery was made in Elul 2017. She found that a whole reshima, a whole Jewish community list, which they used to make in those days. I don't know if you're familiar, but different cities used to make, in a shul, people born, married, and so on and so forth. So they used to make lists. So they found this whole family, Robinson family. They found that Clara, whose Jewish name was Chaya, Clara Robinson was a Jewish person married to Isidore Robinson. I think his name was Yitzchak. And her maiden name, they lived in exactly the same time, in 1880s in Odessa. Her maiden name was Wurhaft, as was the tradition of family, and many, many facts which were found, which made it 100% fact that Al-Pi Halacha, this couple was Jewish, Clara Robinson and Isidore Robinson. As a matter of fact, we found that we only knew before about 2 of the kids, Lydia and Leon. We found also that there was a child called Shmuel Yosef, who was married under Chuppah. There was a girl called Matel, and so on and so forth. So it was identified as Jewish, and this was beyond a shadow of a doubt. At that time, I wrote an addendum, an appendix to my tshuva, and I issued a psak. And this psak was co-signed by Rabbi Weiss, the same one who in the beginning disagreed, by the chief rabbi of Israel, and by 3 other experts in this area who agreed it was Jewish. At the time I wrote the psak, which was Jewish. The family had a reunion in France, and Baruch Hashem, it became a very close relationship. The amazing thing was that this particular couple, who until now, he didn't care about being Jewish altogether, at least in on the inner level, every Jew cares about being Jewish, but he sort of felt that he wasn't interested. She for sure never considered herself Jewish, but as a result of all of these, they were so reconnected that it really started a very, very serious journey towards Yiddishkeit. She was the descended daughter to a Jewish Talmud, to a Cheder. They started to make Kiddush, make Havdalah, and slowly started to get more and more connected. They had another child after that, and they gave the child a bris milah. And as I was sitting in the month of Tammuz, I was sitting Shiva for my father. So whenever I receive phone calls with shilas, I would say that, if you can wait or you can ask somebody else, then, let's wait till after Shiva. But if it can wait or you really, you're waiting for my answer, then I did answer. There is a header to answer shilas even during Shiva. So I got a text from the Hasidic sister-in-law, and she says, my sister-in-law, she has a shaila in Hilchas Nida, and she's embarrassed to call in the middle of Shiva, but she's asking if you can answer. I said, for sure, 100%. To me, it was such an unbelievable thing that she's asking. She had a question of halachic and she was trying to get pregnant, and she started to keep Hilchas Nida, and she felt she was ovulating prior to going to the mikveh, which it's called in the language of halachic infertility, which is, Baruch Hashem, very easy to be able to help people without compromising chas v'sholom on anything to do with nida. And I right away helped, and she became pregnant from next nida from next mikveh that she went to. She became pregnant with Baruch Hashem. But to me, it was such a nachas to see how this family was reconnected. I wanted to say two things. First of all, in the beginning, I mentioned that this was a very, very secret meeting. Why was this a secret? Why did there was a need to make it so clandestine? The answer is that, unfortunately, in Israel, everything new becomes very political, both on a real political level from the politicians, and sometimes even from rabbis who, when they see something new, they don't even look into it before they pass it and say, no, it can be, you can use it, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to make sure that it doesn't become disqualified before it's given a chance to be able to. Now, the reason why this case was so monumental, because usually until now, all the experiments which they made, usually they knew the outcome. There was no surprise. They would check somebody Jewish, and if this Jewish person was matched to one of the families, okay, so he's already known as a Jew, so it wasn't a big surprise, and so on. And you also have to check a lot of non-Jews to be able to develop statistics. This was one case when lechatchila there was no connection whatsoever. This girl really thought she was a Catholic, Polish girl from Krakow, had no connection to Judaism. And as a result of the mitochondrial DNA, she was matched to being Jewish. And only later, afterwards, it was confirmed by other documents and so on and so forth. So it really pushed things very much along. And today, I would say that at least more than 50% of Beit Din in Israel, they use it, but it has to be used very carefully, because it's not something which is used automatically. You have to know how much prior evidence you need and so on and so forth. You can't just indiscriminately use it. And you have to understand that if it's not, that even if it's probable but not completely matched, it becomes even more of an issue to be able to use it, to be able to certify somebody to be Jewish. But apart from the rabbinic opposition, which slowly started but dissipated with time, you also had a political opposition. Anybody who would read about it, Avigdor Lieberman, who has a very strong agenda against certain areas of Yiddishkeit and so on and so forth, he was convinced by somebody that this is a ploy. This whole idea of mitochondrial DNA is a ploy to make the life of Russian Jews even more complicated, to give an extra hurdle, which is for sure not true. On the contrary, it's only coming, nobody's been forced to do it. It's only coming as a suggestion to help somebody who's begging to be accepted as a Jew, but doesn't have enough evidence. So it's only being used to help a person. That's the first objection that he had. And a second objection that he had was, which I mentioned in the beginning, that he claimed that it's going to start disqualifying existing Jews, which is nothing is further from the truth. Nobody, one of my very close friends, I did a lot of research myself on it, did a lot of tests. So when I tested my mitochondria, I was actually matched to the same mother as this girl from Northern Europe. So we're some kind of distant cousins. But I have a very close friend of mine who comes from a very illustrious family, comes from the Madame Schick, Hungarian Pesach. And when he checked his, on his mother's side, he comes from Madame Schick. When he checked his mitochondria, if he would have to rely on that, it would be impossible for him to prove his Jewishness. And nobody has to show him questions his yichus as a very, very, from very illustrious family. So nobody, chas v'sholem, is coming to, even to one iota, question the status of existing Jews. But Avigdor Lieberman, he took it to Bagatz, to the Supreme Court of Israel, to try to ban it from being used. This was sometime last year. And to the credit, even though Bagatz is a very secular organization, the Bagatz threw it out of court and it said it just whatever he claims doesn't match the reality. It's something that is only used to help people and not at all to be able to make people's life any more difficult. Since then, we had we were able to use it a lot. Again, a line portion of people cannot be helped through it because, as we know, like I mentioned before, only some people are being matched 100%, and they have also enough of a prior evidence to be able to certify as being Jewish. There was a very public case, which I have on my, it became a sirton, became like a little a clip. There was a Polish priest who was born to a Jewish family, a family that identified to be Jewish. He was adopted, when his parents were sent to Auschwitz, they left him with non-Jewish neighbors, raised him Catholic, and he became a Catholic priest. He was told by the Catholic family about where he came from. His parents are in Yad Vashem, his biological parents, as Holocaust victims. His adopted parents are in Yad Vashem as Chasidei Uma Sa'olam, as righteous Gentiles who helped to help Jews. And I think one of the reasons was because because of them, this young boy survived. When he came to Israel, it was impossible for him to prove his Jewish status. And he was, circumstantially and logically he was Jewish, but there was just no evidence whatsoever. And at the end, mitochondrial DNA matched him 100% to prove it. And all the body didn't accept it. Today he's a religious Jew working with the yarmulke. He spoke very, very emotionally about this particular ordeal that he had. I remember another case that we had. I once received a call. This was probably one of the only calls that I had directly from a person himself, not through a rabbi that is dealing with them. There was a person from Philadelphia that told me that he wants me to help him to certify his Jewish status. And we had a meeting on Zoom. I think it was before Zoom. It was something like, what do you call before that? It was a Skype. Thank you. And I'm looking at him, and there's a guy sitting with a beard, with a Sforim behind him, Shas and Rambam and everything else. And he's telling me that he's adopted. And he really had no reason. It was only for himself. He was a single person. He wasn't married. People accepted him as Jewish. He was adopted by Jewish parents. He went to the agency that facilitated his adoption. He was able to find his father's yichus. His father, the biological father, was Jewish. His mother, he was able to find that her father is Jewish. His name was Cohen, but he couldn't go anywhere on his mother's line. And he himself was plagued by it. It wasn't something that he owed anybody or somebody had to prove it to anybody. He just himself lived being tortured by the fact that he felt there was some kind of a suffix on his Jewish status. And we were able to, I looked into it. There was no documental trail that could go any further, but mitochondrial DNA matched him to one of the 4 families, and he was, identified fuel as a Jew. We gave him a letter, and it relieved his anxiety and relieved his pain. So since then, we were able to help a lot of people. And but to me, this is a very fascinating example of how, when it comes to modern science, the Torah and Halacha have what to say. And it's not just because science decided that there's a new invention and therefore we have to live with the times and accept whatever science says. We're always you can look deep enough to find a source, a precedent, and a connection with the most cutting edge scientific question. You can find this in the Talmud and the codes, and you can also find how to be able to use those things, for the benefit of our people. And this will be something I'll be speaking about in Mitzvah Hashem also next time, or one of the next times, when I'm going to talk about some of the most cutting edge fertility methods, how they affect Yuchsin, and how we also look for Shas to our Talmudic sages and our the Rishonim, the medieval sages, to be able to, and further, and the Achronim also, to be able to see how these questions are being looked upon, and how nothing is, we never say, this has never existed before. Just like when it comes to Shabbos laws, we can apply the most modern inventions to Hilchos Shabbos. Similarly, when it comes to all these other things that we're talking about, genetics and fertility and medicine, that also can be applied and tried to be used for the benefit of our people in a halachic manner. Thank you very much. Yes. Mutations. No, it's true. Anybody who studies DNA, it mutates over the years, 100%. How come today we became affected over the years? I mean, first of all, there are the Gerus components, the conversions, that's 100%, that people who convert and they assimilate in the Jewish people, and they obviously impact on our genetical makeup. So there's no question, you're 100% right. We started all, how come with Adam Rishon and Chava everything started, and today we have such a diversity in genetics. So that's the answer to the question. Not at all, not at all. I didn't go into it scientifically, but all take it into account, on the contrary. Yes. That's a simon. It's not. It's one of the signs, but it's not something that you certify somebody by that. But I just want you to understand that if you hear everything that I said, I made it very clear that the DNA doesn't actually make you Jewish. I didn't say that. I said DNA can be used to help you to fill a missing link. I never said that that's what makes all of us Jewish. We don't ask anybody to submit the DNA when they're coming and we know the Jewish to get married. We know the Jewish, we know who the mother was, we know grandmother was. And this is only one particular simon that is used to help people who lack other simon, that's all. No. Okay, I'm sure people remember that I said a bit differently. Yes. No, I didn't say that. On the contrary, I didn't say that. What I said was, on the contrary, there's actually was much less assimilation among them, and it's much easier to. There's much less cases that require investigation among them. All I said was that genetically it's harder to pinpoint the family because there's a lot of different families. For Ashkenazim, they were much smaller. That's all I said. I didn't. They started historically. No, God forbid. I didn't say that there was no, not at all. Mm. Part of it, like 45% are from 4 main families. Yeah. That's right. No, Sprinze is true. Actually, Sprinze came from Speranza. It was a typical Ashkenazi name, Sprinze. The reason why, I understand, but nevertheless, it was used in the Ashkenazi Jews. You don't find Sfardim, his name is Sprinze. You don't find this, but the reason why a lot of Ashkenazim dav nusach Sfard is because of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, when he began the Hasidic movement, he started something which was a very big chiddush. It was a very, very novel concept that in Poland and Ukraine and in those countries, they began to use, it wasn't Nusach Sfaradi, it was Nusach Sfard. It's a different. Nusach Sfard is a Ashkenazi Nusach that has also took from Sfardim certain both Kabbalistic kavanos and certain nuances. You understand? So when you say Nusach Sfard, is actually Ashkenazi Nusach used by Chassidim. That's what it is. Sorry, you should first. Yeah? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yes. Mitochondrial Dna, completely, yeah. Yeah, there was not. No, Raglam Dover was the 100%. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there was no any hard evidence, and that's why people were reluctant to seal it. They believe that it's very, very likely that he was Jewish. You're talking about mitochondrial DNA? After he was certified, everybody accepted him as Jew, 100%. Everybody. Sorry. Yes. So the Cohen is actually Dr. Skoritsky, Professor Skoritsky. He was one of the three scholars that we actually met with, and we're in touch with him. He was the one that actually discovered the Cohen gene. And the Cohen gene, there's a reason why it's a very, very fascinating subject, but it's much harder to use it halachically. And the reason is, if I would have time, I'll tell you a fascinating story about the Cohen gene. The reason why it's harder to use is because we know that a lot of things, since Cohen, first of all, he found two chromosomes, and the both could be a Cohen gene, but it's either one or the other. That's already a problem, because once it's one or the other means one excludes the other. That's number one. Number two, there's so many things that could disqualify a Cohen. A Cohen could be, you could have a Cohen chromosome, but you could be a non-Jew, because once you intermarry, it's a male gene. A female one talks about your Jewishness. A male one doesn't prove your Jewishness. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to a Cohen, there has to be a chazaka, which means a legal presumption of the Kohanic line to be carried through. For example, there could be a lot of people who are Kohanim, but they became chalolim over the years. Chalolim means that some Cohen married a woman that he can't marry according to Jewish law. We'll discuss it in one of the lectures now, this week. And as a result, his kids are not Kohanim anymore. You understand? And that is why already 850 years ago, the Rambam writes in his Magna Opus in the Mishnah Torah, he writes, Kol Kohanim desmanenu, Kohane Chazokahim. All the Kohanim of our times, they're Kohanim of Chazokah, of legal presumption. They're not anymore the Kohanim Yuchosim. Once upon a time, in times of the Amoraim, in times of the Beis HaMikdash, they used to be able to trace the Kohanim. They used to have very solid family trees that would trace a Kohen's lineage until the Mizbeach, until they trace him to a Kohen who served in Beis HaMikdash, and says you go until the Mizbeach and you don't have to go any further. They were called Kohanim Yuchosim. Today, all the Kohanim are Kohanim Muchzokim from sorry. Testing. 1 second. Hello. They come from Kohane Chazokah. They come from legal presumption. Now, anyway, we had a fascinating case, how to solve a certain problem with the Kohanic gene, but that's for another time because I don't want to overstep my time frame. But okay, I'll say whoever wants to leave. I'm not keeping anybody. But what happened was that a while ago, we had a very interesting case from a certain very, very organized country which has, it's not Australia, but it's a country where everything is extremely organized as far as everything goes through Beis Din. And there was a story over there that there was a particular, I actually got a call from a dayan in the Beis Din from the country to consult with me. And there was a story that a Kohen married in 1945, he married a grusha, married a divorcee. Whoever married him in 1945 didn't know what he was doing, because written in the Ksuba, Ploni ben Ploni HaKohen, and he married Matrachtado. So I mean, it's a joke. He knew it was a Kohen, but he didn't know that Kohen can't marry a Grusha. So obviously, children are Chalolim. So they had a son, and this particular son now has a daughter, and the daughter is called Chalola. Chalola means that she can't marry a Kohen. She fell in love with a guy from a religious Lubavitcher family who is a Kohen. And he wasn't Sofrum anymore. He came from a religious family, he wasn't Sofrum, and they started a relationship. And obviously the business says, we can't marry you. It was the old day on him from before. So you have over here, somebody comes from Kohanim, but he's a Kollel and a Chalola, and she's in love with a Kohen. So somebody told them, why don't you go to a particular rabbi in America, and he gives you, on the spot, he gives you dispensation. In America, it's a very, very major problem because there's no accountability. And each one, called the Osher Ben of Yasser, the Rabbanim would just come along without any consultation, just to decide you're not a Kohen anymore. So you end up with a situation where you have one brother is a Kohen, one is not a Kohen, and becomes La Yehudim. So they said, go and get permission from him. And they went to this rabbi, he gave him permission, and he said, you said that this other person, the Chatchila, who was the grandfather, who married he wasn't the Kohen. So they came back to the Bezdin. The Bezdin said, listen, we already have rabbis from the previous Bezdin who retired. They paskin that we can marry, we're not going to marry you. So now they have a situation. They have a letter from this rabbi in America, who's quite a famous Litvashirov. They can go to Israel, they can go anywhere, and anybody will marry them al smach, that paper. And this will really undermine the situation in the Bezdin. So what should they do? On one hand, they don't want to be able to start deviating from the ruling of the predecessors. On the other hand, they're very conscious of the fact that it'll create a situation where everybody will decide, we'll go to America, we'll go here, we'll go there, and it'll become all the organization of Rabbanos on which they worked for years will dissipate. So they asked me, do you have any solution? I said, yeah, I have a solution for you. It's a very unique solution. What you do is you get both Kohanim to check the Kohen chromosome. And if it comes out different, then you can disqualify the one that was on that basis, because ones are different means they both can be Kohanim. You don't decide which one. And the one you disqualify is one who was less religious because he was less committed to laws of Kuhn and everything else. So that's the advice I've given them. We still don't have the results because it wasn't still implemented, but that's something which how you could use the Kohanim gene in order to be able also to help people. Thank you. That's what I said. You cannot become a Kohen through this. Impossible. Because you can have non-Jewish Kohanim also.
Thank you very much. The information I have so far is that the lectures have not yet been uploaded. They have not been made available to the public as of today. And hopefully in the near future it will. See you here tomorrow, Mirz Hashem. I mean, Yerushalayim Yirakodesh. How do we switch this off? Where's Rabbi Ba? How do you turn this off?
prefer to do when I come back. Before I, if possible, find out when they're getting married. It's not. Have a look at what's missing. Probably next Sunday when I come back, same day as I do. Who's the other one? ask her? Can you ask her why? Just sit right here.